There's a woman in medical literature who broke her arm and didn't notice for 3 days. Something else in her body was screaming louder, and next to that sound, a fractured bone was almost silent. We think we know what real pain feels like. Burns, because skin carries more nerve endings than almost any other tissue in the body. Kidney stones, which send people to the emergency room convinced something inside them is tearing apart. Headaches so severe that doctors gave the condition behind them a nickname, the suicide disease. For most of history, if you asked someone what the worst thing a human could feel was, they'd point to the body. A wound, a break, a burn. It seems obvious. Physical pain is loud, it's immediate. It has a location you can put your finger on. So this should be a documentary about that, about which injury hurts the most and why the nervous system reacts the way it does. Except that's not where the story goes. In 2003, UCLA researcher Naomi Eisenberger put people in an MRI scanner and had them play a simple ball-tossing game with 2 other players. The players weren't real. They were part of the software. Partway through, they simply stopped throwing the ball. No insult, no confrontation, just exclusion, in a game that shouldn't have mattered at all. But the same brain region that lights up during physical injury, the anterior cingulate cortex, activated almost instantly. Being left out registered as a wound. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If the brain can't tell a broken bone from being ignored, what does that say about the things we've spent our whole lives calling just emotional? There's a reason for this, and it isn't a flaw. It's an inheritance. For most of human history, being alone didn't just mean loneliness. It meant death. No group meant no food, no protection, no one watching your back in the dark. So evolution didn't build a separate alarm for social danger. It borrowed the one already wired for physical danger. Same circuitry, same urgency, different trigger. Which is why rejection doesn't just feel bad. It feels like injury, because your oldest neural wiring can't tell the difference. But Eisenberger's experiment used strangers in a game. So what happens when the person who disappears isn't a stranger at all? What happens when it's someone who was supposed to stay? In the 1960s, psychiatrist John Bowlby studied children briefly separated from a parent. Not abandoned, just separated, sometimes for no longer than an afternoon. The pattern repeated itself every time. First they'd cry, then search, scanning every face in the room for the one that mattered. And if the parent didn't return, something in them would eventually go still. A stillness closer to collapse than calm. Bowlby called this attachment, and it became one of the most well-supported ideas in psychology. Human beings are wired from infancy to build their entire nervous system around another person. That bond isn't a metaphor. It's structural. It's load-bearing. So when that person is gone, not for an afternoon, but for good, the body doesn't just feel sad. It feels like the ground giving way under a structure that was never built to stand alone. Brain scans of the grieving show the same reward circuitry involved in addiction withdrawal lighting up. Not something similar. The same pathway that fires when a person is denied the one thing their brain has learned to depend on. Grief isn't only sadness. Somewhere underneath it, the brain is reaching for a person the way it reaches for something it can't quit. Because that's what love always was, underneath the feeling of it. Not a metaphor, a bond. And bonds don't dissolve quietly. They tear. Here's where the story has to make a choice. Physical pain is real and often brutal. No one should minimize what a burn victim or someone doubled over with a kidney stone actually goes through. But physical pain comes with a mercy, a horizon. Wounds close, nerves heal. The body moves toward repair, almost stubbornly, whether you help it or not. Loneliness doesn't come with that mercy. It doesn't heal on a schedule. It doesn't scab over. It can sit inside a person for years, doing damage with no wound to show for it. In 1988, researcher James House found that chronic loneliness carries a health risk comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Not stress, not a diagnosis. Isolation itself, quietly wearing down a body from the inside, with nothing to point to and no injury to blame. And that's where this story arrives at its real answer. The most painful thing a human can feel was never a single sharp moment. Not the burn, not the break, not even the first day of grief when the pain is at least sharp enough to be undeniable. It's the ache with no edges, the one you can feel standing in a room full of people who like you. The one that isn't caused by anything happening to you right now, but by the absence of something that should be there and isn't. Connection was never a luxury your brain added on top of survival. It is survival. Which is why losing it doesn't feel like sadness. It feels like injury because some far older part of you still believes it is one. Maybe that's not something to fear. Maybe it's proof that after everything, after language and cities and centuries spent trying to become self-sufficient, some part of you never agreed to go it alone. The wound isn't the flaw. The wound is the evidence that you were built for someone.